All right, here we are on Ditch Digger CEO today. Got my buddy Quentin at my side again. I lost him the last one. I had a last minute schedule and lost my buddy Quentin.
You didn't lose me, man. We were amplifying the impact, brother.
Yeah, I had Nick in here, Nick Lodge, who
did good.
Did a good job.
Oh man,
you know, we forgot a few things without you. I got to tell you, but overall he did a good job. But today we got my good friend Tony Saliba, who. Tony, I've admired for the last probably 7-8 years. I've ran into Tony in a few fronts with some organizations that I aspired to be part of, and had the blessings to be able to spend some time with you, Tony, and recently on a trip to Florida and an organization that we both support to go there and support that again. And just got to say, I'm proud to be a friend of yours, and really excited to have you on board today, Tony. Introduce yourself, buddy.
Thanks, Gary. Hi, everybody. Tony Saliba here. Local guy. Came from small beginnings. Born into a household that mom and dad scrapped to pull things together, wrong side of the tracks, if you will. And I'm the oldest of 7.
Wow.
Everybody's still here in the Chicagoland area, and we've, I'm blessed with a great family. I've got a wonderful wife and 2 beautiful children, teenagers. Just building businesses. Gary and I have a lot of parallels. I've listened to most of the podcasts so far, and obviously a lot of Gary's life has touched those podcasts, and I would say Gary and I have a lot of similarities in the way we do things.
Tony, start from there, buddy. Start from the upbringing, because I heard a little bit about your story and I love it. Start with that upbringing, right? I think of 7 kids, right? And
oldest of 7.
Yeah.
My mom was barely 19 when I was born. Dad was a carpenter's apprentice, a couple years older than her, and she pretty much was pregnant. She had 9 pregnancies in 11 years.
Whoa. Wow. Poor thing. Wow.
Yeah, 2 miscarriages.
Oh, wow.
She rests in peace as of the last 6.5 years. A wonderful woman. Gave me a lot of my drive, because my dad worked 2 jobs. He was a carpenter by day. I would see him for 5 minutes when he came home to get out of his dry coveralls and put on his greasy coveralls to go pump gas and change oil at the Pure Oil station in the neighborhood. And, if I wasn't a night owl, I've been sleeping between 4 and 4.5 hours a night as long as I can remember. If I wasn't a night owl, I wouldn't see him when he came home at night. But, he's still with us, doing great. So we've been able to, pretty much once I got into college, he and I formed a better relationship, because I understood how hard he worked just to feed and clothe the 7 of us. I became an entrepreneur very young. I would say I was about 7 maybe, and I maybe a little bit younger, but I remember there was and you guys might remember this, I'm sure the audience will remember, there was a card company where you can gain points by selling Christmas cards, and then they branched into other holidays. But you'd get a big book of Christmas cards, and the points you earned through selling these, they had some pretty cool prizes. And I had my heart set on a bicycle, a 3-speed bicycle, because even though we grew up in Ravinia back then, I was, born in 55, and back then you had the haves and have-nots, and there was an enclave in Ravinia, which were mostly the tradesmen's families, carpenters, plumbers, and electricians. And so I went around and sold Christmas cards massively at the age of 7.
So Tony, I remember that. I mean, there's like electronics you get through that, right? And then there's and then the 3-speed bike with the long forks, a short fork, right? You could get whatever there.
Right, a Raleigh 3-speed bike was like the bomb, right?
Did you have a shifter on that thing? I mean, for the 3-speed, like remember the shifter they used to have?
Yeah, they were aftermarket shifters.
Oh, that's awesome! I remember that stuff. I remember I like the electronics, and I had seen this before, and they had a book of all kinds of cool stuff, right? Cool.
Yeah, like a transistor radio was
a big deal.
A radio,
the biggest deal, right? And 1962, 63, right?
Yeah, we've came a long way. You said 3-speed. I was like, I don't even know what that is.
So I remember this stuff. This went on into the in the late 60s, early 70s, right? This program, because I
imagine it continued.
Yeah,
I actually was a paver myself in high school. I would get a bucket of the coating, a couple buckets of coating, and do driveways. And
wow.
I did that summers around caddying.
Well, hey, get this straight. You were a pavement maintenance guy. You weren't really a paver. You were doing seal coating. So you're a pavement maintenance professional. Yeah. Right. And you bought that at True Value or something like that, or Ace, those buckets?
Ace. Yeah, it was Ace, right?
Ace Hardman, sure.
So, Tony, let me ask you a question quickly. So, with all of the entrepreneurial, obviously you're going door to door to get your amazing bike, and obviously, being a maintenance paver, Gary, right? All of these things are when you were younger. What did it teach you? What did it teach you about business? What did it teach you about grit? What did it teach you about, having, working hard for what you wanted to accomplish young? What did it give you that you think most people don't get now?
Well, at the time, I was, the number 2 earner in my family, and my mother, she would be standing at the door when I came home from caddying or whatever, and we got, paid $4.50 to carry a bag. So she'd take the paper money, and I'd keep the quarters, and it taught me to save. It taught me, to exchange my labor and my, ideas into capital, into money. So, but it also, one of the big things that I think the youth today are missing to a great degree is interacting with adults.
Boy, how about that?
Yeah, in a workplace environment.
Boy, you just said something there. $4.50 to carry a bag for 18 holes. So think about that. 4.5, 5.5, sometimes 6 hours for $4.50, right? But the lesson. So I pretty much, we put a caddy program in place at our golf club when we first got involved in it, my wife and I. And we had a bunch of, a handful of people that were totally against it, and a lot of people not really for it or against it, and then a few that were for it, right? But I'm telling you right now that the relationships gained for these young kids and the emotional intelligence that's created through the interaction with adults, right, carrying those bags for 4, 5, 6 hours is invaluable. Now, not to say there's not some people that are golfers that don't talk to the kids or don't really, don't treat them that well. In my course, I believe we get great people, and they do, right? But
you are nailing it, man. That is absolutely that's it.
Yeah, think about that. Think about you didn't make much money, but think of the education you got in communication with adults, right, Tony?
I have goosebumps right now.
So what would you say the quality, not the quality, but the value? So like if it's $4.50 now today, what would that be?
Well, it might be. It depends on the club, right? If it's a high end club, I mean, our people are very generous, so these kids are getting anywhere from 60 to, I would say, 50 on the low end to $100, $120 around.
So if you look at that, that's $120 for thought process, mindset, and quality connections. You can't get that anywhere.
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah.
Well, I was saying to Chris earlier, I was looking at some of your sample questions, and I have not had a mentor in my life since caddying. I mean, it's hard to imagine, and I spent a lot of time. People say, "Are you a person that lives in the present, in the future, in the past?" So I'm very careful not to dwell in, one or the other too often. So I'm constantly reviewing my past. I'm constantly thinking about where we want to go, but I'm also, savoring what we're doing right now. And when I review my past, I had no mentors besides the people I caddied for. And that was worth, because, my mom pretty much raised us. My dad worked night and day to, feed us and clothe us. And I had about $17,000 saved up when I was a senior in high school. And that was 1973. And I was, I knew if I was going to go to college, I was either going to pay for it myself. I was the first person in my family to go to school.
That's like equivalent to 200,000 today, probably. I'm getting, if you really did the math, and that's amazing.
And I was either going to get the Evans scholarship or pay for it myself, and I ended up getting the Evans after a year my own to get my grades up, because I didn't excel in school in high school. I was B student, and they took only the top 25% of your graduating high school class. So they said, go to school on your own for a year, and I did. I got my grades up and got the scholarship.
Awesome.
But that mentorship, guys, came from the men and women I caddied for at Northmore Country Club. I was there first every day. I was the last one to go home at night. Sometimes I would go 54 holes. I would pick up the latest loop just to, scrounge for money. But also I had great conversations with, George Abrams and Mrs. Richland and all these people who've passed on, obviously, from now. But they had this little Italian kid. It was a Jewish country club. And they, pretty much took me under their wings. I did odd jobs for them in the winter. That was my, I caddied for 9 years. I worked road construction a couple years in college, but I still went and made a loop whenever I could to keep that connection. And my mentorship came from there.
Awesome. There you go. I mean, that's a testament to this Evans Scholarship Program. It took us a while, Tony, to get a legitimate caddy program in place at Bull Valley before Evans scholarships, the Evans program would consider us. And in a year, it's been a year and a half ago, had our first Evans Scholar, and boy, we're so excited that we're getting that stuff done at Bull Valley, a club that didn't have much of this before, and wasn't into caddies. And it's so cool to see this young man, Ryan, who just worked his butt off and wasn't going to have set of parents, great parents, but parents that were going to be able to afford to send him to a great college. And bottom line is he's at U of I in a full ride engineering scholarship. The kid's smart as can be, still doing his loops every chance he gets at Bull Valley. But I mean, it's just such a cool thing to watch hardworking kids be rewarded with this Evans Scholarship Program, and then they have the network for life. That's incredible. Right, so it's really awesome.
You're nailing it. I mean, it's the best. And I'm WGA director. I'm actively involved in actually helping a couple of young candidates right now with their interview process. I support the organization financially any way I can. It's the best. It's a full ride. You can't get a scholarship as good as it, even if you're a top athlete. It's housing, everything.
So what is this? You become an amazing entrepreneur, an amazing businessman from the mentoring you got, but I can't get your butt out to golf ever. I mean,
for you. I tell you, I respect the game too much.
I've got to know your brother well. I've got to know your brother and your nephew well, and it's and they're awesome people, and it's fun. It was fun getting out with them the times I have. But I'm like, hey, when do we get Tony out here? What's with that?
Well, I play military golf, Gary. So you
right, left.
Right. Yeah. So I was decent as a teen, but I can't get my workaday world off my mind, and I can hit the ball a ton off the tee, and then I just chop it up all the way to the hole. So forget about it.
All right. Well, we're still going to try to get you out there. We need you mentoring some caddies on the course. Forget about your game. We need your mind on the course, mentoring the next Tony Saliba, dude.
I'd love to.
Right. So now you go into these little businesses you did as a young man, and to save that kind of money is incredible. After during college, after college, tell us where where you went and what the next steps were in this entrepreneurial dream.
Well, I went to Indiana University and got heavily involved in the Indiana University Student Foundation, IUSF, and pretty much got to networked, which was not a term back then, but I got to meet a lot of people of my own age, and also adults that were IUSF is the student arm of the fundraising organization, IU Foundation, which helps the school raise a lot of money. So we had a lot of activities. We put on the Little 500. I was on the steering committee. I was one of the first Evans scholars to ever be on the steering committee, which, this is at the time, that was 1975 or 6. It was a 25-year-old program. It was, blue blood, aristocratic sort of program. So it kind of broke through the, class lines there and became one of the hard scrabble kids, so to speak. Not saying that my life in suburban Chicago was such as that, but compared to all these sons and daughters of aristocratic Indiana families, it was, kind of embarrassed to say that I was on a scholarship, for being poor and a caddy, but learned a lot. Another, carry on from my caddying days, I didn't really have a mentor there, but I pulled whatever I could out of whomever I could, whether they, were actually taking the time to mentor me. Had a great time at Indiana. I got my first job out of school. I got a degree in accounting, but I didn't really like it. So I went to work as a stockbroker. And these are the, malaise days of Jimmy Carter, where a big day on the New York Stock Exchange, volume-wise, would be like 11 million shares. And we do that in the first 50 microseconds of a day today.
Wow.
But, here I am, a kid from Chicago driving around in a 66 Ford Falcon station wagon that was all rusted out, going from farmhouse to farmhouse trying to sell economic bonds in, the age of Jimmy Carter's high interest rates and high inflation. And these people would look at me like I was crazy. So I would come back to the office and I said, who makes all the money in this business? And they said, you got to be down on the floor. And I said, the floor?
How much you're making initially there, Tony?
I went to work for $800 a month, which was a lot of money. I mean, for me, obviously. And the guys I caddied for at Northmore were all businessmen, entrepreneurs, and brokers, bean brokers and bond brokers and corn brokers and traders on the Board of Trade. So when the guy said, you got to go down to, you have to be on the floor to make all the money, I said, see, guys, I'm going back home. And I clerked. What I had done in my the summer of my senior year, is I studied about this new product called options, and I kind of got the hang of it, and I made one of the customers of my partner, if you will. I was his assistant at the brokerage. It was in Indianapolis, and I made this family, a father and son, account. Like $50,000 in about a 3-month period, and they were from Highland Park, and the accent was so familiar. I said, where are you guys from? I said, from Chicago. And we started bonding. And the father said, well, you made us 50 grand, but you made 50 grand for the company too in commissions. Is there a way we can do what you're doing for us, Tony, and cut back the commissions? And I saw my opening, Gary and Quentin, and I said, get me on the floor and I can save you commissions. So I was off to the races. Now, I clerked for a few months to kind of get up to speed on the actual functionality of transacting. And
how old were you at this point, Tony?
I was that was 1978, so I was 23, and
man.
options were 5 years old at the time, listed options. And so I was going to go to work for these guys, or I was going to have a partnership with these guys. And there was a bunch of guys from my high school clerking down on the floor. And one of the older guys said, you shouldn't be partners with them, because if they complain when you're making money, they're going to be terrible if you ever lose money. So I clerked for a guy who I met when I was in Indianapolis, and we're still friends today. And while I was clerking for him, a guy I caddied for he was down on the floor. He had sold his business and basically he passed away a few years ago in his mid-90s, God rest his soul. And he came to me, Julian Good, and said, hey, Saliba, I remember you from the course. And I totally, remember Julian. I caddied for him regularly, just 5 years earlier. And he said, you know what you're doing down here? And I said, yeah. And he said, could you make me some money? So I put a spread on for him. And 3 days later, I ran over to where he stood. And he was just basically a voyeur, just dabbling, and didn't really know anything about it. But there was a lot of guys down there just getting away from their household lives and, just kibitzing with each other. And I made him the spread made a lot of money, percentage-wise, in 3 days. And I said, Julian, it's time to take the spread off. And he goes, can you do that again? And I said, yeah, get me on a seat, and I'll do it for you. And we were partners for about 4 years. I made him $500,000 and bought him out of our partnership. And to the day we talked about a few months before he passed away, and he said, I should have never let you buy me out of the partnership, because you were the one that got away from me. And so
Tony, the spread. Tell me more about the spread.
I'm sorry?
So I said, tell me more about the spread.
Oh, the spread.
Yeah.
So I traded in Teledyne, which back then, guys, there were no indices to trade. There was no future yet on the S&P 500. You didn't have ETFs. This was where Teledyne, IBM, Honeywell, Digital Equipment, Eastman Kodak were all proxies for the market in general, okay? And so Teledyne was a very illiquid stock, but it moved with the market. And when there was anticipation, one way or the other, they would come for Teledyne. So you would put on what's called a volatility spread. And that would mean that you would have volatility working for you. So you would be long some premium. You would be ratioed long versus short. And, we were in high volatility period. So I put on this, it was a diagonal call spread that was ratioed. The stock moved up. We made a bunch of money quickly on it. So he probably risked about $200 a unit. I forget exactly. It wasn't a very big. Maybe he put it on like 25 by 35 or something. So he risked literally like $5,000, and we made $5,000 or $8,000. I have the tickets somewhere. I save everything. Okay? And he was just shocked at the speed of which we could do this. And then I went, when I was his partner, The one thing I wanted was I wanted a 50-50 deal. I just wanted to be equal with him, and he said fine. And then after we made, the first bit of money, I just said, we should probably make this more or less more like 2/3, 1/3. And then after a few years, when his share, well, I was also paying him for his seat. So after it got up to $500,000, I just said, I want to go on my own, and he let me go on my own. So.
Just a follow-up question on that. So I know a lot of people, especially those who partner together in business, when it gets to a position of, I guess, like your equal partnership, and then it's starting to sway maybe to your side or sway to one side or the other. Did it have any tension with you all's relationship back then? How do you, I guess, easily transition somebody out of a business
amicably?
Right? I guess that's a better word for it. Because I know business is always tough, and they always say they don't try to make business personal, but sometimes that's going to happen, especially in a situation like that.
Yes. Well, it all ties into, so I've been a mentor. So my very first clerk, I taught him what I was doing and put him on a seat. And I learned from my experience, and I wanted to avoid, there was, two rough experiences. The father and son, who were kind of, I don't want to say they were poor winners, although it wasn't the son. The son was a contemporary of mine, and it was his dad that was going to be difficult. And, he's passed on quite a while ago, but that was a rough experience, Quentin, and I wanted to avoid that. And then the one that I had with Julian, where he expected that I was going to be his cash cow for the rest of his life, and it just doesn't work that way down on the floor. So I set up my deals with my clerks that if and I've created a number of businesses since then in and around trading, and some that aren't related to trading at all. But I did start a business to train traders, and that still goes on today. It's August will be the 30-year anniversary of it, International Trading Institute. And I set up my program with my clerks that we would start out 60-40, 60 to the house, 40 to them, okay? And then gradually they would earn percent by the production, and believe me, they didn't all become successful. There's probably was overly generous to start there, because there's a big learning curve in trading. And but I would say that those that hit the ball out of the park through my mentoring, and I built a simulator, a voice activated simulator. I got into technology in 1984, mainly. When I die, my son's going to put on my tombstone, necessity was the mother of invention, because I needed to do this. And when I in 1984, I got on, and I know I'm kind of bouncing around on this, but in 79, when I was trading, I began a service with a mainframe to help me crunch my positions faster. And I met some guys that worked at Metro computer company downtown. And in 84, I asked one of those guys if they knew any programmers, and I hired an old COBOL programmer to learn DOS and build a program for me to, I was a big trader. I was one of the biggest on the floor, and I had giant positions, and it took me a long time to go through my very specific and unique style of breaking down my position. And so I wanted to build a computer program for that. And everybody told me, you can't do that. PCs are personal computers. They're not for business. I said, fine, I'll just do it when I'm home. And so I built my first program in '84, and I taught all of my clerks how to use the program. And then from there, I branched into, technology. But my clerks had to, to answer your question, Quentin, I avoided that situation that I had with my backer by spelling it out very meticulously up front and saying, look, if you're not a good trader, you're going to be out within a certain period of time, because we're going to cull the field here, but we're going to do everything we can, including giving them capital, giving them the technology that was new at the time, giving them assistance. Everybody got their own clerk. And at one point I had about 27 traders on the floor trading my capital. But then they would literally make a decision when it got down to 90-10 to them, and they had enough capital, whether they wanted to go on their own. But the way I looked at it is the services that they got from us were well worth it. And I had a bunch of prize fighters that I was, had made a bunch of money on, and taking only 10% of their winnings was a great deal for them. So I did that.
That's awesome.
Through the '80s and early '90s.
And you started out the '80s, and let's say you're making how much on the floor on a daily basis, and what was your average day at the end of that run?
So I went 70 months. Went 70 straight months of $100,000 a month or more.
I was going to ask you about that. I saw that.
Yeah.
Wait. I don't get it. Wait, 70 months of
70 consecutive months.
Consecutive months
of
$100,000 plus.
$100,000 profits or more.
70 months
per month.
Yes. So it's more about consistency. Now, I think I sent Chris. So there was a weird situation. So in '84, I'm 29. I hit my target of being a millionaire before I was 25, and that was in 1980. Well, it was actually in '81, but I hadn't turned 26 yet. So I popped my head out and realized, this great thing called options trading. I was a member of the CBOE. I had memberships on other exchanges, but I wanted to give back, quote unquote, give back, right? So I got heavily involved in exchange organization. I went on road shows with the exchange. I was into marketing. I was involved in the very new market performance committee. It was the forerunner of any regulatory compliance that we have today. And I felt that market makers needed to address the order flow of the client base to a greater degree. So through all this, I became part of the exchange fabric. I was the youngest member of the board of directors of the CBOE. And then in '87, summer of '87, somebody from upstairs, 7th floors, where all the senior CBOE officials had their offices, somebody from the 7th floor called down and said, there's a writer that's going to do a story on market making. You want to be a candidate to be interviewed for this. So here I am thinking, well, this is an instructional story, how to. And I said, sure, I'll raise my hand. Well, in August, this gentleman named Edmund Andrews called me up, and we're trying to figure out, what would work calendar-wise. And, I was a single guy, traveled a bit, and we arrived at October 20th is the first day that our calendars matched, where he was based in Washington, and he was a freelance writer. where he could come and meet with me. And then I forgot about it. Okay. Well, the market fell apart. You guys all, I'm sure your listeners are fully aware of the 87 crash. And that begun the week before that and really crescendoed on Black Monday, the 19th. And I get a call after the close, and the guy says, Anthony, it's Edmund Andrews. What time do you start tomorrow morning? I'm like, oh my God, I forgot I had set this up literally 2 months earlier. And here I had basically a fox in the hen house. I had a journalist who showed up at like 6:30 in the morning on Tuesday, and he shadowed me all that day, all the next day, and he was like dropped into the eye of a hurricane on, ground zero, and wrote everything that we did during, this very, who knew how historical it was going to be. I mean, what happened in those days blows away any volatility we have nowadays. We didn't have the systems, we didn't have the liquidity. So he wrote this story. And then a couple weeks later, he was writing a story. I didn't really know what he was writing. A couple weeks later, he called me and he said, Success Magazine, which was a big deal back then, wants to put you on the cover of their January issue. And I sent that to Chris, but
I like the stash, buddy. I like the stash.
You like that? Yeah, I've changed it a bit since then, but
I know it.
I grew my mustache in the winter of '78 when I was a clerk, and we had the biggest snow, and you can check it out. It was the biggest snow on record. Michael Bolandic was the mayor. He lost the mayoralship to Jane Byrne because he messed up snow removal, and we had no time to really shave and clean up and dress up as clerks because we had to be there at dark 30, and we worked long hours. So I just decided, you know what, I'm gonna prevent this 10 minutes or 15 minutes of my day by growing a mustache, and I literally had a mustache now for 40 years because of that. So this guy was in our midst, Quentin, and he wrote this huge story, and they used that cover for their ad campaign for years to come. I would go to New York, and my picture would be on the side of a bus. That cover, that was their mailer. I have postcards that they would send out trying to get subscriptions with that cover as the the focus of the ad.
That's funny. That's fine.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about this streak, this 70-month streak of 100,000, because I know some people who are traders can't even get to 100,000 one time, and more so, and I guess let me dive into it specifically, the consistency aspect. I think a lot of people who are business owners, whether, want to generate a lot of revenue, but consistency is extremely difficult, whether it be in business or even, and I would definitely say as a trader. How did you do that? Like, what did you put in place? What, parameters did you know? Like, hey, that's just amazing, man. I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, how did you do that?
Well, thanks for recognizing that, Quentin, because one of the questions that you guys sort of forecasted on your website was, what qualities or what characteristics do you see as really important as a leader? And one is discipline, and one is empathy. But the discipline part, I learned very early on, before anyone else did, or very, very few did, on how to trade almost risk-free. Okay, almost risk-free. Now, people who trade today will say, oh, it was way easier back then because you didn't have, the competition you have today. Because today it's a trading, market making is what I did. Market making today is a very much of a big combine sort of business that only the largest institutions do massively and well. Yes, true. The competition back then compared to today was nil. But we didn't have computers. We did everything in our head. We were all equal in that regard. I prepared every night. I did my homework religiously. It's been written about. I was just, because of that article by Edmund Andrews, Jack Schwager noticed me. I was the only options trader in his seminal book called Market Wizards, which came out 30 years ago this March. And the consistency, Quentin, was because I developed a style of trading that was extremely low risk and required being, fast and first and very attentive. And the reason why I was able to do so well was because I did my homework, because I worked the order flow providers. I would speak with the Goldman Sachs representatives. I was taking, our business out of the pit and giving myself as much of an advantage, which was there for everyone to do. But, I have to say that in the early days when I was trading Teledyne, those guys didn't have the proclivity to do that. In the later days when I was trading the S&P 500, which I was one of only 3 or 4 guys who weren't part of a big combine, because in the late 80s, the combine started setting in with O'Connor and Associates and Chicago Research and Trade and the forerunners to the big groups that are there today. So I invested a lot personally in doing my homework. I told you about the software I created early on that helped me manage these giant positions, and I was low risk. So although I didn't make the big hits on some days as some of my colleagues or cohorts on the floor would do, I never had big losing days. I had a lot of sleepless nights when my position got too big on certain occasions, but it was that discipline that allowed me to avoid the big losing days. And then when the market exploded, I mean, I've written about this, or it's been written about in Market Wizards and other publications about my explosion strategies, which I did my market making to tread water and collect edge to pay for the premium of these positions that would pay off if and when the market moved big. And Nassim Taleb, who is an author, wrote seminal, he's a big thinker, philosopher, trader, wrote Black Swan, was a guy that I met. His mother shares my father's last name, so we think we're cousins.
Can you say that name again?
Nassim Nicholas Taleb. That's Nassim. Nicholas Taleb, Taleb. And in the late 80s, he came to Chicago. I had a partnership with a French bank. We got to know each other. We would go out, two single guys would go out and debate options theory and strategy, jump to fusion in pricing, very technical things. And he took things from a technical standpoint. I was, blood and guts in the pit, but I, understood theoretical pricing. I traded what I described as relative pricing. And he went on to trade this explosion trading, which today is called, tails, looking for fat tails where you have statistically edge events that are outliers, and you've had them speckled. You had one last year. You've had some of that in the fall in December last year. So these big moves allow you to really clean up. So the answer, Quentin, was a foundational base of low risk every day, and then a move every now and then that would allow for your positions to mature and become very profitable. And that's I taught a lot of guys how to do that. Now that's more difficult to do today with the huge amounts of capital in these combine market making organizations like Susquehanna and Citadel and Wolverine and Peak Six, or Simplex. These are big shops that are predominantly computer-driven pricing algorithms that measure their speed in microseconds and sometimes even in nanoseconds. And that's more my business today, is delivering technology to groups like that.
Okay, so when we think about all that, there's a time that this all changed drastically, and you can tell me when, in the 2000s or early 2000s, whatever it was, and when the old school kind of got surpassed by the new school, you exited a business back kind of at this pivot point, didn't you? Or tell us about that.
Yes. Well, so I once again, necessity being the mother of invention, I sought out after the market crashed, I was looking for a multimedia experience to train. I just didn't want to keep training my clerks myself, so I was looking for recordings, multiple choice inventory testing, using some of the software that we were working on to come up with a multimedia experience that I could basically put my brain on a computer and let somebody else proctor it, and I didn't have to train my traders. And as you know, as everyone learns, that in software development, there's three things. There's good, there's fast, and there's cheap. And you get to pick two. Okay, so most projects take longer than you expect and are more expensive than you expect if they're going to be good. And I dumped a lot of money into this simulator, and before I knew it, I did come up with a wonderful product, but twice as long as the engineer said it was going to take, and twice as much. I spent over $500,000 in 87 and 88 to build this. So I took that on the road, and that was my next company while I traded when I was in town, and I was going overseas when the German and Austrian and Spanish and Swedish markets were all launching electronic. And we were the only ones that had this, and we were teaching people how to be market makers, and then started to sell our technology, which helped market makers do pricing and risk management. So the transition to electronic trading started happening in the late 80s, and we converted my floor operation to what was called a designated primary market maker, which there were shops on the floor that used the technology to do their market making. And that transition, my brother, I handed off to my brother, not my next youngest brother, but my third youngest brother, John, to manage that. And we had a pretty good, for about 10 years, had a pretty good run as a designated primary market maker. And we sold that business for about $10 million in 01, right before the market absolutely collapsed. In the meantime, I was building out, so I was a partner at Research and Trade, and that was a front-end system that I barnstormed around Europe and in Asia in the 90s, put on over 5 million air miles If you do the math, that's circumnavigating the globe every 2 weeks to build these. I had a home in Frankfurt. I had a residence in Milan. I had a condo in Sydney, and I shared an apartment with a buddy in Stockholm. When I sold that stuff in 2000, moved everything home, I had 4 electric razors. I had 3 mountain bikes that I trained on, because I did triathlon in each of these cities. And we had businesses set up in 21 countries selling this software on Sun Microsystems. We are a Sun Microsystem distributor. So the transition happened over that time. I had a 1-year non-compete, and in '99, I launched it, getting ready for the electronification of trading here in the U.S. And one of your questions, Chris, was, what was the business idea that you originally had, and how did it change from the original vision? And I thought I was going to put all the floor brokers out of business in 2000 with my technology, and I didn't realize the power of membership. And these guys all banded together and prevented me from doing what I wanted to do. So I pivoted to if you can't beat them, join them, and it took my software that I automated to eliminate them and turned it into a tool they could use. And today that is the dominant platform. Still 17 years later from the rollout, is handling about 1/3 of the national volume and is the dominant sell side technology in the listed option space.
What's that called?
The product's called Broker Point. My company that I exited in 2007 for $250 million was Liquid Point. And the company that bought it, I stayed on for a few years, to 7 actually, to manage and grow it. Now it's it's probably worth over $500 million. It's called Dash Financial, and that technology, we had over 2,000 nodes on the platform nationwide, professional brokers and traders, and it's still my company today, Matrix Execution, which I set up a year ago to compete with them because my non-compete ended. That's our main competition. And it's really weird because I have about 17 of my staff today are my former guys from Liquid Point, and our goal is to take down Broker Point, our own creation, guys. So it's really sort of strange.
And so you feel that your new business has enough differentiation that and the old product isn't quite what it could be, and you believe this new Matrix Execution, you're able to create great differentiation to take this to a whole nother level?
We believe so, yes. It's 4th generation technology, all built in HTML5, super fast, super flexible, but it's like trying to get rid of Ma Bell when everybody has a telephone and you're saying, okay, I've got a new telephone system, and they say, who cares? This one's good enough. So we've taken it on the road since the beginning of the year. We just launched it, and we're getting the comment, no brainer. And now it's just a matter of transitioning those people out of Broker Point and into we call it QRN, Quote Request Network. The QRM product it's got mobile. It's great. So yeah, you're nailing it, Gary. It's about differentiation, the right price points, and also leveraging it so that more can be done with less. I hate to say it, but that's been, workflow automation has been our thing for the last 20 years, and reducing fat finger errors, double key punching things, side calculations where some of these shops have multiple platforms where we can do the same with one. That's basically what we do.
So when you think about that, some of the listeners will think, gosh, is that right? Tony builds this product, sells it, and then years later competes against it. How is that good ethics in business and all that? Tell me your point on that. And I know the way I think on that. Let's hear the way you think on that, Tony.
On whether on the ethics of it, or
the ethics of competing against a company that you actually you started,
yes.
grew, and then sold, and then years later you compete against it. Tell us about that.
Well, okay, so the key there is, years later. I been 12. It'll be 12 years this July since I sold it, and I stayed on 7 years to grow it, substantially. The folks that I think a big lesson in this is the seller's remorse that one has when you. I'm a builder. My dad was a builder. That's in my DNA. I build companies, and what I should have done is sold it and walk away and get into something else in 2007. But I stayed on to grow it. The buyers, which was a Bank of New York and a local hedge fund here, or a local private equity firm, here, Governor Ronner's private equity firm, by the way. They, before I left 7 years later, they had already recouped all of that they had paid for my company and about a 20% return on top of that. And the company was worth anywhere from 1.5 to 2 times as much of what they paid for it. Mm-hmm. So from that standpoint, they were rewarded handsomely. The ethics part was that I didn't want to compete with my staff. And a big part of what I do is about putting myself in their shoes. I run my companies like families. And I would never compete against the team that I worked with to build that. But once I left, they started leaving. The key guys started leaving immediately. My partner and chief technology officer left within 6 weeks or so after I did. And systematically, the key guys exited. And that was 4.5 years ago. So I gave them plenty of room to get over anything ethically. And they merged with another company that didn't particularly see the same values that we did as we built it. And systematically, they got rid of my staff, and we welcomed them with open arms. And now it's really it's an inanimate object. It's software that we built that's old. The people are gone. The people that run the company are all people I don't know. And I would say when I sold the company, we had, it was an amazing per head valuation. We had 38 people and sold for Q. And that, from launch, we launched the product in July of 2003, and we had it sold in 4 years. And I made a lot of my staff millionaires because I grant everyone equity and equity warrants. So we're all rowing in the same direction.
I just got whiplash from that, man. 38 people and sold for $250 million. That's awesome. That's amazing. And I share your position on this stuff, right? I mean it's like you're Tom Brady, and you created value in your team, and everybody won, and you got traded, and you know what? 10 years later, if Tom Brady, 3 years old, can compete again, he's going to compete again.
That's true.
And that's common business ethics as well as life morals.
You know what? And to add to that, Tony, I want to say too, it shows that you have a lot of loyalty to your people. You said one thing that I think is really important when you run your company like family. I mean, and then the fact that everybody succeeds is really key. I don't think anybody would be it makes a lot of sense. My family isn't there anymore, so now I know what I'm good at. I'm gonna bring them over with me, and we're still gonna win. That's pretty cool.
Well, the thing about it is, Quentin, is that when I sold when we were going through the sales process in '07 and drawing up the contracts, employment agreements, and non-competes, I was like, well, why would I ever want to compete with my own company? This is crazy. I literally kept saying that and thinking that this is nuts. I would never do that. In fact, I would like to stay on and run it. And these, little did I know, right? And these guys were licking their chops, okay? They got me to, reinvest in my business and run it in an entrepreneurial fashion for a number of years until, they were process, the company is process-oriented private equity, and they don't know anything about managing companies except their own probably, but the company they put together with us in New York had a poor culture, and I tried to maintain my own culture where I have total open door. We doubled the head count within 9 months of the sale, and when I left, there was close to 90 employees with close to 400 family members that we supported. And like I said, I had guys coming up from the floor saying, Saliba, you put my family in a position of security, financial security through your actions. You are a lion. And I just tried, I don't know how many, over a dozen employee millionaires overnight when we did the transaction. They believed in me. I believed in them. So I never thought about competing with them until that culture changed so much that there was criminality in a Bermuda office that had nothing to do with us. And, the private equity firm had lost control of the management. It was a very bad situation. So competing with them now is sort of a mandate to replace our old system with the guys that built it, the guys and gals that built it. We're literally going to be adding 3 more of former employees. Back then, when I did this, when I launched, I was 44 and oldest person in the shop, and most of my team was right out of school or in their 20s. Now, I'll be 64. Same team is in their 40s, but same, aggressive attitude towards business, same camaraderie, same comp plans in place where everybody watches each other's back. We're all rowing in the same direction. I really think that you have to care about the people, and they'll act like owners, and that's what you want them to do. And that's what I did, and that's what I'm doing again.
I see it so often, Tony, where friends of mine, they end up selling to private equities, whether they stay on or they don't stay on, and the culture changes. It goes from that entrepreneurial aggressiveness, right, and innovative mindset to systems and processes, and we all need those. We all need systems and processes, but sometimes they outweigh that entrepreneurial spirit. And once that happens, the true entrepreneurs and the innovative minds aren't comfortable there any longer.
Absolutely. I mean, it's got to be continuity. I think my next oldest employee is 10 years younger than me, and we all have the energy, maybe even more energy than some of the new hires of the 20-somethings and 30-somethings. And, I completely love your idea of harvesting, folks who share different ideas and different opinions that makes the workplace more familial. And that's I'm not saying we don't have some great rocket scientists on staff, because we do, but for the most part, everybody kind of gets it, and everybody is working for the same goal, and we don't have, um, we all have each other's back, and we don't have conflict in that regard.
Well,
So
I'll say that I've come to the conclusion that when we actually love our teammates, right? When you actually love your teammates, compared to, they're here, they're a number, and if they get things done, they're here for a long time, and if they don't, they're not, right? I mean, it seems kind of corny, right? But when you realize that these teammates are there at your side, spending more time of their year with you at work, working for the same best interest to push forward this value proposition, right? That if you can't love them, if you can't, God says we got to, love our enemies. If you can't love these people that are around you every day, along, at your side, then boy, you're going to have a hard time building the culture you're talking about. And I don't believe, I shouldn't say this, but most private equity firms I see don't feel that, from the experience that I've seen. I'm sure they're out there, right? But I haven't seen it. And that's something everybody wants. Everybody wants to know that when they whatever they're driving for, there's a why, and there's an atmosphere where you have each other's back, like you just said. Hey, there's one thing I want to get. I could go 5 hours with you, man. This is so much fun to listen to this stuff, right? But there's a time not long ago when President Trump was running for office and used a story of the Chinese. Do you want to share that with us at all, or no?
Yeah, that's
this is pretty crazy. But I don't know if you guys remember. But when Trump was running for office, he said, in Chicago that China is trying to buy the stock exchange. How crazy is that? We can't let them in and all that, right? Well, Trump doesn't always do his due diligence, right? And this is one of those cases, because I found out that Tony was involved in this, and asked Tony the story, and of course, if Trump would have known the real story, he would have said, "Wow, this is another American story, not the Chinese are trying to take over the stock exchange," right, Tony?
Exactly, Gary, man. I'm not as religious of a guy as you are, but I was raised Catholic, went to church religiously while I lived in the house, not so religiously since I've been out of the house, but raised my kids to be, one of my kids is very, religious and very, but I feel I'm spiritual and go fairly regularly. But I, believe in a higher being, and I, believe in the sacraments. And I also believe in synchronicity. And this Thursday is the 1-year anniversary of this thing ending after 3 full years. And the Trump event was right in the middle of those 3 years. So I was approached. I left Liquid Point in the fall of 2014, and shortly thereafter was approached by a private equity firm, of course, that wanted to buy the Chicago Stock Exchange with a consortium of overseas capital, including Chinese investors, Middle Eastern investors, and some South American investors. And they needed a local guy who knew the marketplace to kind of be the front man, and so on and so forth. And there the journey began. Well, the Middle East, the Dubai guys dropped out, the South American guys dropped out, but the Chinese firm stayed involved. And as a background, this company, a family-owned company, quite like you and I, Gary, where the progenitor, 1997, started a real estate business in southwestern China, Chongqing, and grew it into a hazardous waste material disposal company, a multi-billion-dollar company. And his son is running one division. It's a very much of a family business. It's not the Chinese government. In fact, completely the opposite. And over time, I spent, their executive vice president spent 400 days in America shuttling back and forth trying to get this deal done. Quite the opposite. They wanted to get capital out of China. And they loved Chicago. And if anybody from the local governments would end up listening to this podcast, shame on you because you blew this amazing opportunity. So the Chicago Stock Exchange, one of the oldest exchanges in the country, on a really good day would do little less than 0.5% of the national volume. Okay, so it wasn't a big player, but it served some purpose. It employed about 85 people, had a great management team, and the way the Chinese government sets up their capital movement laws is that you cannot make investments in financial services companies. So you can't buy a broker dealer. You can't buy an FCM, which is a futures clearing merchant. But exchanges are not financial services entities. Believe it or not, they're not a broker dealer. They're an information. They're highly regulated, but they're not deemed by the Chinese government. So here was an opportunity for this entrepreneurial company called the Caddy Group, along with myself and a couple other Chicagoans, to buy this Chicago Stock Exchange, which barely turned a profit. I mean, in 2016, it barely made $1 million. Okay, so for us to pay $20 million for this was getting the shareholders out at a really good price. But in February of 2016, Donald Trump, on a stump speech, had a letter that was circulated by a really nasty guy who was Republican from North Carolina. He was not reelected. Robert Pittenger. He didn't do his homework. He was a hypocritical individual because Smithfield Food Company, which is the largest processor of pork product in the world, is owned by the Chinese, is in his district, and he demonized the Chinese to set up a straw man for his reelection campaign. Mm-hmm. So he wrote a letter, and Trump seized on this, and in a stump speech, he, said this should not happen. We, keep the Chinese out of the U.S. financial markets. Well, what our plan was to bring Chinese customers here to Chicago. They were picking out a building to make their U.S. headquarters here in Chicago. They loved us. They loved the whole thing, and they were going to dump millions and millions of dollars into the Chicago economy. And the revenue, we would have had hundreds of employees. The plan was grand. And then we missed getting this done in the Obama administration because they approved the CFIUS, which is the government organization that is headed up by the heads of the Treasury and all the main commerce departments, approved the deal. And then it was just for the SEC to rubber stamp it, and we were told by the SEC that they would. But then the election happened, and nobody wanted to touch it.
Right.
And it got
I remember like it was yesterday because I was like, wait, what Chinese government's going to take over the stock exchange, right? And I remember digging into it after that and finding out, it was a great, it would have been a great entrepreneurial story. You teamed up with private people from all over the world, and these Chinese billionaires included, to really create an environment in the Chicago Stock Exchange where it's kind of vibrant again, profitable, vibrant, and employing many people.
Would have been huge. And nobody from Chicago helped me. I went to every Politico I know. Nobody would lift a finger. Wow. Not Dick Durbin, not Tammy Duckworth. Too bad. The last thing is the parent company of the New York Stock Exchange, Intercontinental Exchange, bought it for about $80 million. So the shareholders, which are mostly Chicagoans, did way better than we did. We realized the value was in it. Got caught in this cryptocurrency craze, and then they basically closed it down. I think they let go all of the staff except for about 6 or 8 skeletal staff, and they snuffed it out.
Wow.
So no more revenues for Chicago or Illinois. Thank you very much.
Wow. Okay, so let's we've got a few more minutes. I want to cover a few more things here. So number one, your vision for the future. I mean, you're if anybody knows you and they're around you, your energy and is amazing. You're like a doggone 30-year-old and constantly thinking forward, and that's what I love about you. And you're always going to be just a bunch of energy for anybody to be around you. I believe they're energized, and that's going to be your life for the next 30 years, 40 years, right? Tell me though, where's this energy going to take you here in the next few years, in the next 10 years?
Well, so we have fortunately or unfortunately, it's mostly focused around my businesses. And so Matrix Execution is the competitor to my former company that I mentioned. I also have a cryptocurrency platform that started last year, and that is growing major traction. I see the digital asset space like I saw the option space in the 70s, and it's going to take major toehold. I'm trying to limit my involvement. We have we have Reagan.com, as you know, and a number of different other businesses, insurance company, that it's all family business oriented.
You're a respected name in the Heritage Foundation. I mean, that's a great organization I know you're a big part of.
Yes, that's the mothership. I feel at home when I'm with Heritage. They're for the founding principles, first principles of the country: free enterprise, financial freedom, and free commerce, but also good, solid family values and strong America. So I see my energies continuing to. I mean, like you said, I feel like I'm 35. I can do a 2-minute handstand. I can do a lot of things that a lot of people half my age can't do physically.
I need to see that.
Just trying to, keep it together and not get injured. You don't want to hurt a knee or twist anything.
so you and I connect a lot on a lot of the free enterprise things that we're behind, or we're constantly focused on, worried about what some people aren't worried about as far as the free enterprise world that we're in changing to something really different and ugly. One thing I really heard with you, and it's a story similar to mine and many, that you really earned your stripes, or let's say the dignity of work you learned at a young age, and in the fulfillment of earning a buck to help your family, to take your friends out for an ice cream cone, whatever it was, right? The dignity that provided value for you was an amazing thing, as it was for me as a young kid. I'm worried, really worried about the $15 an hour minimum wage in our state of Illinois and all over the country. It's spreading across the country. It sounds like a good thing, and I know you're a compassionate guy like I am, but our experiences tell us it's a bad thing. I mean, tell me what you think of that. If you agree with me or not, tell me if you don't agree with me. But tell me why. Tell me why you think it's. I want to know if it's kind of alignment, if you're aligned with what I'm thinking. But
yes,
scary.
I am, and I struggle with the concept of disparity, between the haves and have-nots, and that is the old saying, that there's, statistics. Damn statistics and lies, and that liars, will figure. Figures don't lie, but liars will figure. So you can look at statistics any way you want, and when you just step back and say there's a wealth disparity. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've moved up and down in different brackets, over time, and America allows for mobility. So when you say that there's this underclass that's getting poorer, yes, there's a wage gap if you look at it that way. But if you tinker with it, you could ruin the whole thing. And I think that there's plenty of programs to help those who need help. Maybe, the government needs to get out of our way, and having a minimum wage will hurt that lower class in terms of, people not getting jobs. I mean, what is wrong with working 2 jobs? I worked 2 jobs for a long time. My dad worked 2 jobs pretty much till he retired. Okay. It's not preferable to having 1 job and making enough to live within your means. And in his case was raising kids that were expensive or whatever. But I think the tinkering with the minimum wage is very detrimental. I think the big, and we could have a whole session on this, the big culprit is higher education, okay? The big evil culprit in our society are colleges and universities, because if you look at prices from 1980 to today, nothing has grown like the price of a higher education. It is a ripoff. You go to these better schools for the sheepskin, but you can get their course content in a MOOC online for free, but you don't get the sheepskin.
And I think that's going to consistently change over the course of the next 10, 15 years, and it's going to drastically shape a different culture in education. And again, back to the minimum wage. For me, my opinion is that first rung of the ladder that I needed to go deliver newspapers and mow lawns. I mean, the first rung of the ladder was easy for me back then to understand how to make a buck, right? At very, very minimal pay. But man, I understood what it took to make a buck at 10 years old, 11 years old. And the kids today don't have that opportunity. And if we take that opportunity away from them at 15, 16, 17, 18, golly, they get out of school, out of college, and never really worked in a job to understand what it takes to make a buck. That's a big disadvantage for them in the future of their life, to understand what grit looks like, what duplication looks like, and all the cool things you can learn in a minimum wage job. So I worry that there'll be a lot less opportunities for jobs for kids as we continue to make this a political deal.
Absolutely, but you're doing things, I'm doing things, people like us are doing things to continually reach out, and try to change that. Organization near and dear to your heart and mine, Turning Point USA, helps spread the great understanding of free enterprise. So together I think we can make it through it, but the minimum wage is a $15 minimum wage will cost jobs. And I really think that there are programs to prevent the youth from being saddled with unbelievable college tuition debt and such that will help.
Well, we're gonna keep on working on that, buddy. That's for sure. Now, tell me this now. Last thing, and if you got anything else that you share, great. But when I look at your story, it's a true American story, a great American story of entrepreneurship. When you think about this, I mean, you're a smart guy, and you're hardworking, and all the other things. How would this look if you're born in a country unlike America, in your opinion? And where do you feel that the free enterprise system has allowed you to do what you do?
Well, during those travel years of 89 to 98, when I spent so much time in 21 countries. I mean, I signed contracts in Kuala Lumpur and in Hong Kong, as I mentioned, Mexico. So I can tell you firsthand that with the exception of Australia, I mean, even in Great Britain, there was a lot more difficulty, less freedom. But Australia was very much, maybe I could have done what I did in Sydney because I had, there was a lot of freedom there as opposed to every other country I operated in during those 10 years. There's nothing like America. Why do you think, I mean, I know you know the answer, but why do you think everybody's trying to get in here? So the Heritage Foundation publishes a index every year, the index of economic freedom. And I urge everyone to go and check that out because it shows in very much detail. We are not the most economically free country,
No.
but that index shows a lot of, it has taxation and other things. So it's harder today than it was maybe 20 or 30 years ago in America. But we are, we're in the top 10. But I did business in Switzerland, and that's near the top. It would not be as easy for an entrepreneur. I think the can-do spirit in the U.S., where guys like you, myself, will help other entrepreneurs overcome some of the regulatory morass that we've had during, the last 20 years. And Trump is chopping that down too. That's why it's been easier the last couple of years.
Well, here you go. Here's a guy that Trump's message undermined a huge opportunity in your life, right? But yet you're pretty blunt in saying, hey, the stuff that's going on now is great for business entrepreneurship and your future and all our futures.
That declaration and everything that followed after that cost me and my family office that was going to do the deal with the Casing Group at least $20 million. I don't harbor any ill will. I understand what was going on. We had other opportunities maybe to get under the wire with the Obama administration. I do blame our local politicians and state politicians for not lifting a finger. They hated Trump then, they hate him now. So they were not going to do anything that might have looked like he was going to get a win. And all they had to do was sneak this one over the line. That one congressman from North Carolina was the arch villain in that regard. But, there's always opportunities. I just spent, better part of 3 years of my life to do it, Gary, and I'm sad about that. I'm sad for Chicago and Illinois. So.
Right. Well, you're always going to find opportunity continually, and we all know that everything doesn't work out. It doesn't work out, and we'll keep fighting. But anything else you can think of, Q? What else you got, buddy?
Man, this was good. I got some amazing takeaways from Tony, some Quentin true takeaways. One of them, and actually a couple of them, is keen to thinking like you thinking, my friend. Like, one, be the first to come and the last to leave. That was really good as far as thinking about success. And one thing you said, and I agree with you, Tony, from a mentor's perspective, pull whatever you can out of whoever you can. I think that was pretty key. Another thing that you said as far as your journey is how you got some of the success. Prepare every night and do your homework religiously. I think a lot of people forget it's not about the will to win, it's about the will to prepare. And the key moment of that is extremely true, and I think that's part of what you have while you have. But you keep saying this phrase, necessity is the mother of invention. So obviously I had to write that down because it must be true, and it makes a lot of sense. As far as when it comes to any success, anything that's a need out there, you're looking for a problem to solve, and my friend, you've done that. And a couple of other things: differentiation, price point, and do more with less. Obviously is true. I think a lot of people try to do so much so soon. But if you could do more with less, man, you can specifically now, especially now, is extremely important. But the last thing, and I think I'll heed to what some of the things you all talked about, regardless of how you feel, still today, there's no place like the USA. And my man, I would agree with you in that regard. So that was some of my true takeaways, man.
So I would only add one more, which was you can only pick two. You get three. There's three things: good, fast,
and
right?
cheap.
And cheap.
You
and
can only pick two of them.
And boy, that's a great point. In business, to have all three of those probably is going to work out in the long run.
Absolutely. And next time we talk, I'll tell you about I invented Uber, and I have the blueprints and the software, and I did it all in 2003, and with my team. But I was 4 years early to the party with there was no smartphone, there was no global tracking, there was no personal. But I built it all out. It was going to work on laptops and browsers at home, and I went around in Chicago. and talked to the cab companies to help. It was designed to bring the market forces from options and futures trading in Chicago to the cab industry, and I was shot down systematically by every group.
Wow.
So much so they felt I was going to approach on them, and this was in early 2004, and so I went out and got a full-time driver.
All right, Tony. Well, you know what, Tony. Let me and you find a time to sit down and talk about it over lunch, and I'd love to get a lot of that information right there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You bet, Clinton. When you want to, I'll come to you. You come to me. We'll meet in the middle. Whatever. Let's do that.
Awesome. I
Well,
love
Tony, thanks a lot, buddy. You're everything I know you are, and it's really exciting to be friends with you and watch you continue to kick butt and continue to build that vision for the future, how you're going to solve problems in the future. So thanks a lot for being part of this, man. It's a pleasure to spend the time with you.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Quinn. Thanks, Chris.
And we'll see. And
Kareem.
and we'll see you next time on Ditch Digger CEO.
See ya.